It's Red Eye Radio. Gary McNamara and Eric Harley talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios, this is Red Eye Radio.
All across America and around the planet, we are Red Eye Radio. Welcome and good morning. Thanks for being here. Yeah, just to go over that again with the $34 trillion debt that we have, because this was one of the suggestions of one of our callers, that if we took all the money from leases, and this is based on the fact of, and again, when I saw the story, National Review says it's what he means. When I saw it, I wasn't sure, but it was like Trump saying we can pay off the national debt with oil money. It's like, well, no, we can't. And the caller said, well, we could if we used, leases, if we took all the lease money that we had. And so we went to the 2019 figures, and roughly a little over $4 billion a year you get from it. And if you include everything else, which would be mining and based on the percentages that we could see, and it's a rough estimate, roughly around $5 billion. If you used $5 billion a year to try to pay off a $34 trillion debt, even if you stopped interest today, remember now the interest on the debt's near $1 trillion.
Yeah, right.
And so it would take 6,800 years.
So you're saying there's a chance?
There's a chance. And that's the thing, and I'm glad.
By the way, that was the Paul Ryan plan, remember? To pay it down in 6,800 years?
No, what was his, 30?
30.
30 years, yeah. Paul Ryan had a plan to pay down the debt in 30 years, and the Democrats absolutely rejected that as being the most radical proposal that would kill old people. And remember, I believe it was based on that.
Ad?
Where Paul Ryan was pushing the old person in a wheelchair over the cliff.
They had an ad that they put out, and it looked a guy that looked a lot like Paul Ryan pushing an elderly person in a wheelchair over a cliff. They want to kill old people and starve children. And that's what you get. Because we have to go back, step out of the forest a minute and look at the entire picture, and it starts with political will. As you pointed out, if we were to have to cut 30%, okay, you're insane.
Yeah.
If you propose that on, you're going to be called insane. This is what they're going to say to you. You're insane if you want to cut these programs. That would be, by the way, a haircut across the board, 30%. 30%? They couldn't do the penny plan. Remember that?
Yeah.
They can't get to where they slow the rate of growth in spending. Remember that? That was another one. And then Obama on Medicare. With Obamacare, it was like, yeah, but they come in and actually cut, because the Republicans had proposed slowing the rate of growth, in some of the plans, and I think part of it was Medicare. But Obamacare came in, and what was it? How much did they cut long term over from Medicare? 700 billion?
So it was like
750 billion?
Yeah. They took, from...
Yeah, as a result of Obamacare. Yeah. And the Democrats said nothing.
Yeah. And when you look at it now, entitlements, I believe, is or will be in the next year. I was looking at the figure the other day, 51% of the budget.
Yeah.
Entitlements. That's why when they say you can't touch Social Security or Medicare, you can't change anything on it, you have to. You have no choice.
Well, you're going to do it now, or you're going to do it later.
Yeah. Either way, you're going to do it.
Right.
You either do it and you say, okay, like if you're looking at your own budget saying, okay, we're going to do something here because the next 5 years, if we don't do it, we're going to have problems, or you're going to have those problems in 5 years where you have no choice but to cut.
Right.
Or drastically increase it. And that's why, when Trump said that, no, absolutely, we don't touch Medicare or Social Security, any entitlements at all, you're going to have to. and he knows it because he had once advocated raising the age to 70.
Right.
So he knows you can't do it. So, yeah, you're saying you're trying to get elected and you can't say you're going to cut anything. And that's why I did ask the caller, tell me one thing that now if you look at the Freedom Caucus, they'll tell you what to cut.
Right.
And they'll tell you what has to be they'll tell you what has to be done and what you have to do eventually to entitlements. Was it we read what Larry Kudlow said the other day, what you have to do. What you would have to do it. And remember, Bush was on. Remember when Bush said back at, what was that? Was that 2000? It had to be. It was his second term.
I think it was his second term, so it would have been. Was it 2006?
Yeah, where he said we need to reform, and he said, and talked about the private accounts and what you'd have to do there, and the Democrats came in and said absolutely not, we're not going to do it, and Bush said then fine, tell me what we need to do to save it, and they said nothing.
Right. They basically
laughed. And
they laughed at him.
They laughed at him.
He said, "Okay, then please present your plan," and they laughed. Man, 2006, think about that. I mean, you actually had a little bit of time to work with it. Now we're doomed. Because there isn't going to be the political will. It goes back to what Trey Gowdy was saying on Fox News a couple of days ago from New Hampshire. He said, he believes that they'll kick the can, that they'll do some kind of temporary patch with it in 2030 or 2032 or wherever, and then they'll just kick it down the road a couple of years for the next guy to take care of. You got to deal with it. There is no quick patch because that's like putting a Band-Aid, and I know he knows this. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a dam that's broken. You can't do it. It's not going to stop it. And you either make the cuts or the cuts will just, because it will just crash. And when that happens, a 30% haircut across the board is going to look good.
We've got some economic questions, so let's get to it on the economy, budget, things like that. We go to Bobby in Dayton, Ohio. Bobby, welcome. You're on Red Eye Radio. Welcome to the show. Hi.
Hi, guys. Good morning to you. Thanks for taking my call. I don't get it. I'm not a smart guy by no stretch of the imagination, but it appears to me if a country makes its own money, how can it go into debt anywhere? I think it should not have to borrow money from China or any other country because you produce your own. And I just don't understand how we should have a shortfall on Medicare, Social Security, or what have you, when the country produces its own money. Cut down trees, we print it. What's the problem?
Well, what gives it the value?
Yeah,
though?
what gives money value?
I guess.
How come the United States dollar is worth something, but Russia's isn't?
I'm assuming because people value the U.S. money more than others.
Why do they value it?
Because of our economy.
The spending power it has.
Because of our economy.
Why does it have? We're going in a circle. Why does it have spending power? Why?
Economy?
Why are? Let's put it this way. Why is Japan, for example, willing to sell somebody in America a vehicle and get paper dollars for it?
U.S. dollars.
U.S. dollars.
But their currency isn't worth as much as the U.S.
No, because it doesn't matter what they get paper dollars. What do they do with that paper dollar? Or whatever the currency is. I mean, paper, whatever, electronic, whatever. You understand? We use paper because it's easier to figure out. The dollar has value because of the goods and services produced in the U.S. economy. And so when you produce, for example, what really what really kicked off what was the end game in kicking off inflation that you've seen that nobody has liked over the last 3 years was the Democrat bill where they spent $1.9 trillion. But what originally kicked that off was printing $7 trillion over 30 months in COVID in order to, save the banking system, save the economy. And you did not have those goods and services being produced. Therefore, the value of the dollar went down. Therefore, all products that you had to buy skyrocketed in price.
Really, Bobby, we should only be printing that money when there's an expansion of wealth to represent that amount of wealth. That's what that dollar represents, the amount of wealth, the productivity of our nation. And so when there is an expansion of that, then, of course, that's the idea. When you're printing this money and then you're sending it out there, and it's not in a time where we're expanding the economy, then the value of that dollar goes down, which it did, and you have inflation.
Yeah, for example, the Russian currency isn't close to anywhere. The Russian currency, they don't produce anything that the world wants.
Right.
For the most part, you don't see, oh, we're getting a ton of stuff from Russia. It doesn't happen, and that's why their currency isn't worth as much.
Right.
And it's very simple, and it's all figured out in the private market, in the international currency exchange.
And to finish that equation that Gary was talking about, Japan gets the money. Well, where does that dollar go? Where does that currency, that U.S. currency, whether it's electronic or paper dollar, where does it go? Eventually, it has to come back to the U.S.
Eventually, you have to be able to buy a goods or services, or invest it in something American.
Right.
If you don't do that, then it's just a piece of paper. It's not worth anything.
Right.
And who would give somebody a car for a piece of paper? You're giving it because you can get that worth back, or you can take it and invest it and make it even, make more money in the United States on it, or even invest it in foreign companies and make it, because the world knows that the American economy is producing goods and services. That's what it all comes down to.
The pay that you get, Bobby, from work that you do, that represents your time, your productivity, right? That's what that is about. So it is like, okay, Bobby is producing this much. This is his value. And sometimes you go in and renegotiate that value. Hey, I think I'm worth more. And that's the idea. And all right, this is what he is worth in terms of a producer. And so when you talk about the value of the dollar, it's based on the goods and services that we produce as a nation. That's what gives it the value. Printing the dollar, it's paper, or technically linen, has no value in and of itself without our economy backing it.
And that's,
I got you.
Yeah, and that's why when we say, for example, maybe hope you can understand this part of the economics. That's why we say, when we have a system where we're building electric vehicles and the taxpayer is subsidizing to build electric vehicles that cannot make a profit from these companies can't make a profit, even though the taxpayers are subsidizing it. So the taxpayers are subsidizing it. The companies can't make money on it. It's not as an efficient product as the current gasoline models that are out there. Gasoline models are more productive and more efficient. They can do more things. It's what people want. And so when you attempt, we played the audio cut earlier where Biden said, well, this is the new economy. We're creating the new economy. Well, his new economy is the government telling companies what they're going to produce, and that the consumer will buy this product, which is not as productive as the product that exists already. The consumer doesn't want it. The vast majority of consumers don't want it. It's too expensive for them. And at the same time, the companies can't make a profit. Well, you're hurting your economy by doing that, because you've got to be able, the whole system runs. I know the left hates this, but the whole system runs on companies making legitimate profits. Not fake profits, but legitimate products. They're selling a good or service to somebody who is satisfied with that, and they're able to, negotiate a price. They pay the price, and the company is able to make a legit profit off of that. The entire system, every charity works on that, every road and bridge. When Biden said, you didn't build that.
Or Obama said it. Yeah.
What did I say? Obama said that you didn't.
Said that.
Obama said you didn't build that. We said, he's clueless. He has no idea how an economy works. The private sector funds, the profits of the private sector fund everything.
Without profits, there's no tax revenue. And without profits, there is no philanthropy.
There's no jobs.
It's all about the profits. And, the EV thing is similar in one way, at least, to what we went through in the housing crash, because the government came in and made all of these rules and regulations, forcing basically the banks to lend to people that were less than qualified. So you put money into the hands of people that essentially organically couldn't afford it, but because of the government regulations and assistance by the government, not really money, but regulations, they were able to go out with a bunch of money on the street, basically shopping in the housing marketplace. Well, investors and house sellers started raising the cost of those houses and everything else. And investors in Wall Street get a lot of blame for that. But without Fannie and Freddie, those two government-sponsored entities backing all of that, none of it would have happened. It comes down to this. If Bobby wants to go to the banker and say, here's where I work, here's how long I've been working, here's how much money I make, and here's how much money I got to put down, what kind of house can I afford? And that bank says, we'll lend you this much. Those are the two parties that matter right there. The government gets involved, and it overinflates everything, and that's why we had the housing crisis. Thanks. We appreciate it, Bobby.
Okay.
Thank you for the call.
Yep.
We appreciate it.
866-90 Red Eye.
This morning's USDA Farm Report is brought to you by House Products. Tested, trusted, guaranteed since 1920.
What was at one time conceived to be impossible now has been proved on this location today as possible.
Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack in Soberton, Georgia, Wednesday, attending the opening ceremonies for the LanzaJet Freedom Pines Fuels facility, the first such plant in the world that can take ethanol and turn it into sustainable aviation fuel, which, Secretary Vilsack says, the aviation industry certainly wants and needs.
At the end of the day, if we're really to mitigate the consequences of a changing climate, the transportation sector clearly has to get to a net zero future. In order for it to get to a net zero future, aviation has to get there as well. And it can't get there without a sustainable aviation fuel. So this is a day to celebrate a very significant step forward.
A step forward, he says, not just for the aviation industry, but for farmers who will be supplying the feedstock for what could be a huge and growing demand for ethanol. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
This report brought to you by Cenex Fuels and Lubes.
Coming up, more with Gary McNamara and Eric Harley. It's Red Eye Radio. You're listening to Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios.
And he's Eric Harley, and I'm Gary McNamara. What I find it interesting, the last caller, for example, seemed to get angry. He's angry at us in the discussion of economics. There's a lot of economic theories out there. When we had got a little loud before the top of the hour with the one caller, where finally we agreed, that was the fact that he wasn't listening to what we were saying, and he was putting words in our mouth that we don't say. And you and I noticed this lately. About 95% of the criticism that we get are things we've never said.
Right.
And that happened to me in the last 48 hours again. I'm like, I never said that. It's like, how do you defend that? Yes, you did. Well, no, I didn't. What was the what was the context, or what do you think we said? And it's like, well, we've never said that. And so the last caller immediately was angry, and I don't know what his petrodollar had to do with what we were discussing, but we never got to that point. But when he said that by the way, it does sound like a liberal philosophy when he said a country is like a company, and it's not. They're completely two different concepts. The government is not a company. A company exists to make profits. That's their goal. The government exists to protect. The government of the United States exists to protect the people and to provide them with laws, with basic things like police departments. As you get more to local governments, police departments to protect you. And the reason that police departments aren't private is because you're dealing with constitutional issues there.
Right.
When you talk about the government and government investments, as they call it, like roads.
Right.
Roads are built, the government may oversee it. The federal government, the interstate transportation system, for example, they may oversee it, but it's built by private, contractors and subcontractors. They're the ones that actually build it. The government's involved in a lot of those projects because of zoning, eminent domain. They need to be put into areas, and there are things that government can do, like the interstate transportation system, which they need to be involved in, that does increase efficiency and productivity, in the long run, because it opened up areas. Now, the private sector could do that if you weren't if you weren't 50 different states. If it was just one state, you talk about here the even the private. Are they ever going to build the private train between Dallas and Houston? Where's that at?
Yeah,
right now?
I think that actually is still on
right.
course. Yeah.
Now that's supposed to be private money, but still the government's involved for eminent domain,
Right.
and things and zoning or whatever they need to do. So the government's involved in it because you're dealing with then private sector, like eminent domain is taking land.
Property rights.
Property rights, yeah, right. So it's a property rights issue, which is why government's involved. But government is not a company. Government needs to make sure that the essential services are there, but much of it is in cooperation. Electricity, for example.
Right.
I know they'd like to nationalize it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure.
But the fact is, the private sector's involved in, utilities like natural gas, whatever. Water, not so much, but water, could be. And as we've seen, for example, even garbage pickup. When I was growing up, garbage was done. I remember going to the town of where I grew up, the town of Tonawanda Highway Department. All the garbage trucks would be in there. They don't have. That's where I grew up. They don't have them anymore. They subcontract that all out.
Yep, my town does.
Yeah,
Has been for a while.
Right. So it's a service that is, and so does my town now too. Now it's a service that the government regulates, but the private sector does it. So when you talk about things like infrastructure, when you talk about there's cooperation between governments and the private sector, especially when you're dealing with private property.
Yeah,
but it's not a company.
Right.
It's not government. It's government is the cost of doing business.
Well, and that's it. And the caller implying that the spending is like it is with a company.
It is not.
If you have a growing population, you have to spend more. If you have a growing company, you have to spend more. Actually, that's not true. When you go item by item, there are certain items that if they are the essential role of government, that may require higher spending. But his point implies that all of the spending as a group has to be more, and it applies to all of those items. It applies to all those items. A company is spending more in order to get greater profits.
Right. That's the only reason they're spending more.
They're buying equipment, inventory. They're paying for people, their most important resource. They're doing all of that investment to get it back. The government doesn't do true investment. They call it, the left loves to call it investing. And basically, it is like you said, if you expand a highway system or something like that, then you're accommodating for maybe a population growth in that area, which makes people more productive than in the private sector. They're producing more, which means the revenue base for the government is sustaining or growing more. But those are very limited items there, again, in the limited roles of government. The spending overall is nowhere near the same because the motive is different, because the government doesn't actually produce anything.
Yeah, we weren't saying that government isn't necessary.
Right.
And I get a little bit of a kick out of it because he was getting angry at us.
Yeah.
He was furious. Well, no, governments and companies are not the same entity. They don't exist for the same reason. And I think most people listening, it's like, well, yeah, they don't. I mean, they're both necessary, The role of the government we want limited, and we believe that a lot of the things, like when you look at it, a lot of the things that are done that are really important. For example, last week, when you're in, doesn't matter whether you're in a Democratic town or a Republican town. I'm actually in because of I live in a Democrat town, and they still have to provide garbage collection. Even though they subcontract it, they've got to do it. The water's got to be there. They want they want to make sure remember the outcry when cable came along and cable had a monopoly because they do a deal with the local town and people would go crazy at the town because because of it. Now you're not with streaming and everything else that's changing a lot, but still you got to bury those wires, and therefore that's why we've all got the abatements. I got an abatement in my backyard. I don't think they're ever going to use it because they do everything in the front yard, but basically I can't do anything there because that's for the utilities. So both are necessary. Their roles and what their responsibility and obligations and their authority over the public is always being challenged, by the people. More on the local level, the reason that we don't want the federal government controlling so much is they're so far away from the people. They're not likely, and you see, they don't really respond to what the American public wants. Right. Most towns have to respond to what the locals want.
I call my my city hall, I probably call them, I don't know, a few times a year at least on certain things. And whether I'm suggesting something or asking a question about something, that access locally is key because it gets things done. Having that done and managed at that local level gives us that access and also holds their feet to the fire to make sure that those things are going to be done. But, getting back to the caller, the purpose for a business and its spending is completely different. And you leave out the biggest part of the equation, and that is the government produces nothing.
Nothing.
It takes revenue from the private sector to, the original design was to facilitate the essential roles, and we believe it should be limited roles of government, but it doesn't produce anything. It can move money around. It doesn't produce anything. Right. And there is not a profit motive there.
The production of the dollars that government may spend come from the profits of private companies. And that's why when we'll never forget it because for us it was a big deal when Obama said, you didn't build that, you didn't build the road. Of course you did.
Yeah, right.
Like as if the private sector had nothing to do with it. Right. It's like, well, number one, the private sector built those things because government really doesn't run construction companies except maybe for the Army Corps of Engineers, who probably uses a ton of subcontractors also. And so, you look at it and you and as we said, it's like he's completely clueless because every dollar that the government spends comes from the profits, or hopefully Democrats hope from the wealth of the rich.
Yeah, right. And that's it. Obama, you didn't build that because the government had to build the roads and bridges. The government didn't build. Actually, we built that too, Mr. Obama, because the private sector revenue and profits created revenue to the government in the form of taxes. Those taxes facilitated the building and maintenance of those roads and bridges. So he had it backwards. And that's the way the left thinks. Hey, you can't do anything without the government. That's quite the opposite of Ronald Reagan. And things that he pointed out were true. Government's not the solution.
Well, as we see now, we're to the point, and I think the public is recognizing it with the Biden administration, that you're paying your taxpayer dollars not to improve your life. Because we've talked about what the role of government should be. And we talk about, okay, but how far should they go? What authority do they have, over you? What do most people want from government? Well, they want government to protect you and defend you. And what we see in this government is they're doing the exact opposite of why government exists.
Yeah.
Because they're making your life harder in every way. And as we went through earlier in the show, if you want to listen to it, we went through everything from Governor Abbott. If you want to go to our podcast when it comes out here in a little bit, the first hour we talked about, the statement that Governor Abbott put out. It's federal government's role to protect states.
Yeah.
It's federal government's role to protect from invasion. And he's talking about the cartels and the fentanyl coming in because of it. And here you have an administration that is taking your taxpayer dollars and doing everything to make your life more dangerous and harder.
Yeah.
And more expensive.
Right.
And it's the exact opposite. So the left has figured out a way to take the role of government in a completely opposite way of what it was originally intended to do.
Right. And that's something they have preached about over the years.
But
quite the opposite of JFK. For the left today, it's ask what the government should be doing for you.
Yeah.
And that's what they believe the role is. But then beyond that, and it's gone much further than that, it's not just handouts and benefits. It's damage.
Yeah. Creating the damage. You're paying taxpayer dollars to create damage in your own communities. And that's not by the way, that's not happening for the most part in some of the big cities it is, with the sanctuary city policies.
Oh, yeah.
But in most places, people won't stand for it.
Right.
866-90-RED-EYE.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
It's Red Eye Radio. He's Eric Carly, and I'm Gary McNamara. And one more thing to the caller that said, companies and government are like the same thing. And it's like, well, no, they're not. They're not even close to being the same thing. Especially local governments realize this ways back. A lot of, back then, used to have a huge public works department in a lot of cities and towns.
Yeah.
It's a lot smaller now because what they found out is we can't be a company. Companies can do it more efficiently than we can. And more productive.
It was cheaper for the taxpayer.
Right, and the taxpayer is demanding that services are done not only more efficiently, but cheaper. And so that was actually an acknowledgement, especially from local governments that are closer to the people and the wrath of the taxpayer to see that evolution, especially since I think about when I grew up in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And, now you look at it and so much is done by private contractors that are done. Not everything, especially like water departments. It'd be interesting to find out why. I guess because the infrastructure is different there than even like electricity and natural gas. But natural gas is still.
But it's also, I think, also about safety, the water treatment plants and everything else, and the delivery of the water. And I'm guessing a lot of that is, there has to be so much oversight in that process.
But there's probably a lot of subcontractors in that business now, too, compared to what there might have been.
I'm guessing.
Or contractors or whatever.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One.